Good evening and welcome to our show. I'm your host, Brad Grindrod, and tonight we are celebrating World Storytelling Day. So just to give you a little background, according to Wikipedia, World Storytelling Day is a global celebration of the art of oral storytelling. It's celebrated every year at the March equinox on March 20th, when thousands of storytellers in Europe, Asia, Africa, North and South America, and Australia tell stories to their indigenous audiences on a mutually agreed upon theme in their own languages, all during the same day and night. And this year's theme is New Beginnings, which is a theme I think that can encompass virtually every story imaginable. And tonight you're going to experience a taste of that diversity with 8 storytellers, coming from both Toastmasters and Fireside Storytellers League. And to start off, I'd like to play for you a short video clip that some of you have seen on our Facebook page. It's a preview for tonight's show that was produced by my friend and video artist extraordinaire, Deborah Walker. So take a look at this video, after which we'll begin our show. The story I'm about to tell you is a Japanese folktale entitled The Crane Wife, which is arguably the most popular Japanese folktale of all time. And like so many of the stories that Japanese parents tell their children, it centers around those magnificent birds known as great white cranes, which are often depicted in their stories as possessing magical powers, bordering on the miraculous, as they do in my telling of this revered folktale as well.
Larry Crackle. I have been a storyteller since I was a kid, and I told stories around the campfire, had a great time, and everybody says, you should write a book. So I did. I wrote a book. In fact, I've written 17 books by now of all the crazy things I did when I was a kid.
My name is Madonna Hanna. In 1986, I attended the Beauclair Family Reunion Barbecue in St. Louis, Missouri. At that time, I met my third cousin, Zola Beauclair. Her life spanned 3 centuries. She was born as the sun was setting in the 19th century, lived through the 20th century, and passed on as the sun was rising in the 21st century.
The story that I am working on, that I've been working on all year, is called the Schwinn Saga. We all have Schwinn bicycles and we're on a bicycle trip. And one of the bicycles went over into a ravine and crashed. Another one fell over a swinging bridge, and tonight is going to be a surprise where a testosterone-powered bull elk takes on a Schwinn bicycle. Stay tuned.
Can you all hear me now? Here we go. Our first storyteller this evening is Larry Krack. He's an author, a humorist, a storyteller, my friend, and partner in producing this show. His books and stories about his boyhood adventures growing up in the rural Pacific Northwest are legendary, as you're about to hear. Ladies and gentlemen, here is Larry Krack.
Thank you, Brad. It was 1966. We were 3 boys, 12-year-old boys. Can you imagine 12-year-old boys? There was Mo, or Mortimer, really. He was this short little guy with wire-rimmed glasses, frizzy Einstein hair, and he was an Einstein character. He was really smart. And his dad had the hardware store, and his mother doted on him, only child. He was the most intelligent kid in the class, too. His father had just given him a 28-inch Schwinn green bicycle, brand new, 5-speed. That was the rage. Oh, he couldn't even reach the ground. He had to have a stool or something to get on, and then when he wanted to get off, he just bailed. And he also had front racks, rear racks, and the Schwinn Expedition packs, the black packs with the green stripes. Well, when he was on that, he looked like a turtle with a head sticking straight out top. An Einstein head at that. We nicknamed it the turtle. Then there was Curly. Now, Curly was this big, tall kid with a blonde afro, and he was getting his growth spurt, and he had perpetual high water jeans. They couldn't keep him in jeans, and his voice was changing too. Ooh, always, ooh, hardly understand him. And he had a Stingray, a Schwinn Stingray, a green one. And he had, the banana seat, the sissy bars, and for him, he had this great big duffel bag out in front between his legs. And when he rode, his knees came up to his chin. And then there was me, just normal old me, Larry, common. I could disappear in any crowd. I had short hair because my dad thought long hair is the sign of the devil. So I just took it and I hid it all the time. Well, Mortimer decided to organize this bicycle trip because we were graduating from 8th grade and going into high school. A 27-mile one way to the end of the road, and we lived in this little town, it's called Elma, down there in the middle of the Olympic Peninsula, and we were going to ride all the way out to the end of this road and go a couple more miles, and there was this really nice meadow. Mortimer was always planning. He was the brains, no brawn, no common sense. Curly was the brawn, no brain, no common sense. And I was the common sense with no brawn or no brain. And they called us the 3 teenage stooges, Larry, Moe, and Curly. And my bicycle, I almost forgot my bicycle. It also had a Schwinn frame. It was a junkyard bike. It had a banana seat. It had the sissy bars. And I had found somewhere had welded these long forks out front, and it looked like a chopper. And I named it the Hog. And Curly's was the Ray. So the Ray, the Hog, and the Turtle headed out. We took off, and I already talked about in an earlier version of all the saga, all the things that had happened. And we finally got to our meadow. And we built this lean-to. Isn't that cool? We chopped down some poles, chopped firewood, put a hay tarp over the top. And this was before the days of dome tents, 60s. They didn't have dome tents back there. We built a fire and we cooked up our pork and beans. We just took the top off the can and put it on the campfire there, and our chili, because that was way before the days of the freeze dried. And then we ate our supper and told ghost stories, and we told bear stories, and we told cougar stories, and we told Sasquatch stories until we had scared ourselves spitless. Finally, we were so exhausted, we finally went in the lean-to, let the fire die down, and I don't know how we got to sleep, but we did. Then in the middle of the night, something came through camp. It was a clattering and a vibrations and snorting and grunting and all kinds of other stuff. It was on both sides of the lean-to, and it was making all kinds of noises. We couldn't figure out what was going on out there. And it was a full moon. There was something moving out there. And finally, when our nocturnal vision kicked in, we saw it was a herd of elk, a huge herd of elk. Oh, with a great big bull, a big bull. Wait, you know what? A little calf came up in front of our lean-to, and we had stationed our bicycles in front of the mouth of the lean-to for a barricade, and the turtle was right out in the middle there, the big green 28-inch turtle. We'd taken the packs off, so it was there in its glory with its reflectors flashing. And that little calf just kind of come up to that turtle and was looking this way and was looking this way, and it was like they were having this discussion. It was the cutest thing you ever saw. Well, it kind of got Curly's, tickled his funny bone there, and he kind of giggled with his falsetto pubescent voice. You know, that sounded just like a bull elk. And it got that bull elk riled up. He just bugled on. Have you ever heard a elk bugle? It is so crazy eerie in the middle of the still night. Well, Curly thought that was funny, so he did it again. I told him, "Shut up, you idiot. That bull's going to come over and get us." And I stuffed his pillow down his mouth. Well, you know something? That bull did start coming over. It took one step, another step, thump, thump, and it shook the ground at every stomp. It shake its antlers and it snort, and it came right up to this bush, and with one swoop, it just shredded that bush right down the. So there was just a stump left. Well, that made Curly nervous. So he did a kind of a nervous, and the bull did his, and he came right up to our lean-to, and he was looking at the turtle. Oh, I think he thought the turtle was doing a noise. He was having this conversation with the turtle, and he'd kind of go on this way and eyeball it with that. It wasn't the whites of his eyes, red in his eyes. And he'd turn this way and he'd eyeball that turtle. And just like he did to the tree, he just took those antlers, stuck them down there, and he was going to shred that turtle. This isn't fair. The turtle didn't have a shell on anymore. And whoop, the bike went right up into his antlers. You could hear spokes pointing, all kinds of other stuff. Well, that bull didn't know what he got into. He had a monkey on his back. No, he had a turtle in his antlers. He just bellowed, and the whole herd just flew. They were gone, left the bull to himself in the middle of in the meadow, and he was dancing around, prancing around. He got up on his hind legs, and he bellowed, and he pirouetted like a ballerino. You know what a ballerino is? It's a guy ballerina. So he was doing this thing, and then he decided he was the old turtle was way too much for him. So boom, off into the woods he took off. Unbeknownst to us, a fir tree came to his rescue, and he went under the fir tree. Those limbs, they just come down and just raked the old turtle right off, and away he went, and the turtle just swung in the moonlight. Well, enough of that. Poor old Mo, he was heartbroken. His brand new Schwinn 5-speed was gone. He started crying, weeping, and Curly, he's soft-hearted. "That's okay, little buddy." He started crying. I said, "Shut up, you sissies, you idiots. You sound like a pack of coyotes. You're going to get the coyotes over here, and they're even worse than bull elk." Well, they shut up. Finally, we got to sleep. Next morning before breakfast, Mo was right out of bed. He says, I'm going to go look for my bike. I know it's out there somewhere. I've got to save it. So off he went. While Curly and I made breakfast. Hour later, wouldn't you know, Mo comes pushing that 5-speed Schwinn. Well, the front was wobbling because it had sprung a bunch of spokes, and then the cables were hanging over the handbrakes, and there was a hole in the seat, but it looked like it was operational. And he said, Larry, you think you could fix this? I think we could. Now, usually I cut off the saga right there and leave the trailer for you to listen the next time. But however, tonight, the theme of this world storytelling is new beginnings. So I've got to add the ending to it. Well, we did fix the bike and we limped on home. And the first place we went to was Mortimer's or Mo's house. And we kind of just come in all exhausted. And first thing his dad came out, what happened to that bike? That's a brand new bicycle. I looked at him. What do you mean? What about him? Forget the bike. Well, Mortimer, he kind of stood up straight, which shocked me because he was always obedient to his dad. And out the door comes his mom. Oh, my baby. Oh, my baby. Oh, are you okay? Forget the bike. It was unbelievable that Mo stood up like a banny rooster and says, I'm okay, and the bike's okay, and don't worry about me because I'm one of the guys now. Couldn't believe it. He was always trying to be one of us, never could fit in. But this experience was a new beginning from Mo. And from then on, he was one of the guys. He didn't worry if he got dirty. He didn't worry if he got his equipment all busted up. He didn't worry if he was going to get killed by climbing some cliff or something like that, which is another saga. And he changed. It was a new beginning for Mo. Brad.
Thank you, Larry. Our next storyteller is Bonnie Anderson. Bonnie's been telling stories since she was in grade school. She even earned the storytelling badge in Girl Scouts. These days, she's a children's librarian and still enjoys telling stories to all ages, kids and kids at heart. Ladies and gentlemen, here's Bonnie Anderson.
Hi there. When I was a kid, my parents liked to watch a show called Hee Haw. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to make you raise your hands if you watched it. It's okay. But one night I happened in just as this barber started telling a fractured fairy tale. It was the one about the pea little thrigs and the wolf that hosed the blouse down. I thought that was just so much fun. I decided I want to do that. So I did. I even borrowed a book called My Tail is Twisted by Colonel Stoopnagle. It's a really old book. It's like 100 years old, something like that. But it had tons of these fractured fairy tales in it. Tonight, I'm going to share with you one of my favorites. It's called Rindercella. Once there was a beautiful girl named Rindercella. She lived with her step-leug mother and 2 step-leug sisters. One day, the pransome hints who ruled that dinkum decided to throw a bancy fall. He invited all the beautiful maidens. Rindercella's step-leug mother and 2 step-leug sisters vowed that they would woe. So Rindercella helped them to do up their beautiful bear and put on their beautiful bounds. And off they went to the Bancy Fall. Rindercella cracked down and sighed. Oh! her Gary Fodmother appeared and said, Rindercella, cry are you wying? And Rindercella said, I can't go to the Bancy Fall because I don't have a beautiful gown. Her Gary Fodmother said, Rindercella, I'll give you a beautiful gown and you can go to the Bancy Fall. But remember, you must be home by midnight. So Rindercella went to the Bancy Fall. She met the pransome hints. They lell in five and danced all dight. But just as the clock struck midnight, Rindercella remembered what her Gary Fodmother had said, and she stand down the rares. But as she stand down the rares, she slopped her dripper. The pransome hints ran after the beautiful maiden, but all he could find was the slash glipper. He vowed that he would lurch the sand until he found the beautiful maiden whose finey toot fit in the slip dropper. The next day he set out to lurch the sand. When he came to Rindercella's house, first he tried the slopped dripper on Rindercella's steply-eyed mother. Oh, her butt was too fig. He tried it on the eldest steply-eyed sister. It fidn't it. He tried it on the younger steply-eyed sister. It fills didn't it. He was about to bow when Rindercella came into the room. And when the pransome hints tried the slopped dripper on Rindercella's finey toot, it fid it. And Rindercella and the pransome hints were married and lived everly happer after. Now, the story of the Maury is, if you want to go to a Bancy Fall and have the pransome hints loll in fove with you, don't forget to slop your dripper. Thank you for listening.
Our next storyteller is Rosemary Sissel. Rosemary's been telling stories with Fireside Storytellers League for 9 years and is an avid collector of all stories, spooky, radically inclusive, and or generally unbelievable, she says. She's also a college student who just finished her finals. Ladies and gentlemen, here is Rosemary Sissel.
Hello. Hello. Thank you all so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Larry and Brad and everyone who helped put this together so that we can celebrate the magic of storytelling together. Today, I have something infused with lots of magic, a little bit of excitement, and a very interesting, oh yes, I can share the title. And a very interesting moral about life and purpose, which I am struggling to figure out myself in college with finals. So we'll see if I can learn something from my story as well. It is a tale about. It is a tale from France from the 16th century. A tale that includes many sagas, many quests, lots of adventure, lots of fun. I will be only telling one short chapter, and it is a tale from the life of Bradamante. Now, Bradamante was a very famous knight in France in the 16th century. Very strong, very daring, very tough, and also a woman. Bradamante went on lots of long quests and voyages with lots of her friends and fellow knights, chief among them, Roggerio. She and Roggerio fought, engaged in much intense bloodshed, lots of craziness, many quests, many adventures together. And they became very, very good friends. Until, that is, one day, as happens from time to time in the world of fairy tale, Roggerio disappeared. Now, as was the custom in the days before the internet and much of anything else that characterizes our modern age, what did you do when someone went missing? You searched for them. So Bradamant went on a long quest, days and nights, just her trusty horse, her sword, her shield, her armor. She relied on her wits, her daring, her cunning, her ability to kill small animals barehanded and larger ones with her sword, and, of course, the kindness of strangers. For as she traveled through dangerous forests and small villages, she came upon many strangers, some of whom shared a tale startlingly similar to hers. Friends of theirs, people that they had loved, gone on quests and adventures with for many long years, had, out of the blue, disappeared. Now, in the time of magic and quests, this did happen from time to time, and so many of these strangers were very happy that someone was going to do something about this. And of course, gave her lots of provisions, lots of good blessings on her journey to find and free Rogério and all of the other mysteriously disappeared humans. But there were also those who did not wish her well. One of these was an old king who had had many quarrels with others in Bradamant's family over the years, and he devised a plan absolutely destined to trap her. It was, as is often the plan for trapping knights, a plan to distract the knight who was going on an adventure to save one friend with an adventure to save someone else. And so, as Bradamant was going along one day through the woods on her trusty steed, there was a young man planted in the woods who said, "I heard a damsel in distress down there in that hole." Bradamant looked. There was a giant deep pit in the middle of the forest. And as it was very, very, very far down, she said, "Oh, well, if you want me to save this damsel in distress, I need a rope or something," which this young man had. And as she descended into the hole and began to climb down the rope, as she spiraled wildly out of control, she thought, "The young man wasn't very good at holding onto the rope." And after many seconds of free falling into the void, she landed, but not with a crash that killed her on impact, as the old king has planned for, but on a patch of surprisingly soft grass. She was stunned for a few moments, and then, regaining her senses, began to feel around. It appeared soft, but softer than even the softest down, the softest wool, the softest cashmere she had ever felt. And looking around and looking up, she saw very, very high in the sky was the tiny little pinprick of light and a small head of the young man who had dropped her into the hole, which was quickly receding. And then as she looked around, she noticed that this soft grass-like material extended far to the sides and into the vast reaches of this cavern, a cavern unlike anything she had ever seen before. There were jewels, gold, beautiful little stones, and on the far corner, a door with a torch sparkling with light unlike anything she had seen before. Definitely magical, she thought. And of course, as happens when you see magic, you're just drawn towards it. And so she followed the light to the door. The door swung open, and there, in a beautiful gown, looking for all the world as unsurprised as anyone who can tell the future is, was a woman. A sorceress, an enchantress, definitely a magician of some kind. "Ah," Bradamant said. "A magician, just what I need to help with my quest." And I am Bradamant, of course, the very famous knight who saves lots of people, goes on lots of quests. You know the name. "Yes," said the woman in the magical gown. "I know. I just so happen to be Merlin's apprentice herself." And, as this made perfect sense to anyone in the world of fairy tale, Bradamant said, "Good. You can help me with my quest." "Ah," said Merlin's apprentice, "I already know everything about your quest and exactly how to help you. It's lucky that the king betrayed you and you fell into that hole." Bradamant said, but she didn't stop to think too long on that detail and proceeded with the plans for the quest. Now, as soon became clear, Rogério had not just disappeared, nor had any of these other people disappeared. They had been kidnapped. Kidnapped by a sorcerer far more powerful than any Bradamant had ever fought. This sorcerer lived in a fortress on top of a high hill somewhere that no mortal eye had ever seen and then lived to tell the tale. Luckily, Bradamant had enlisted the help of Merlin's apprentice, who told her of all of the magical protections that guarded this fortress and told her exactly how Bradamant was to enter. He said, "You must ride for 7 days and 7 nights without stopping. You must ride to the east, and once you have done this, you will come upon a hill, a mountain covered with magic, so thick that it cascades off of the land in waves, shimmering in the air. And then, of course, you will climb this mountain, approach the fortress, knock upon the door, and you must fight to the death with lots of natural, man-made, magic-made foes, possibly friends, and then the sorcerer himself will emerge with a gold brooch so bright that if it touches mortal eyes, it will paralyze the soul, the body, your entire being, so that you cannot move, and then, of course, you will be kidnapped as well. "Okay," said Bradamant, ready to go on the adventure. "Wait," said Merlin's apprentice. "I must give you the counter charm. This is an amulet in the shape of an eye that when you place into your mouth, it will protect you from paralyzation by the power of the golden brooch." "Ah," said Bradamant, "now I am ready to continue on my quest." And she mounted her loyal horse and rode off for 7 days and 7 nights without stopping, using her skills of catching animals with her bare hands and killing larger ones with her sword as she rode to feed herself. And, she slept every now and then in the back of her mind somehow. And then she arrived at a hill, a mountain, so magical that waves of magic rolled off of it like a fog, like a steam, like a bath that would enclose you and never let you out. And, of course, she climbed the mountain, and she got to a castle hewn out of rock, but also out of magic itself. She approached, she knocked on the door, and out poured a flurry, a storm of fire bombs, of rain, of hail, of all of the magical forces of nature that any sorcerer could ever control. And she fought them using her wits, her cunning, her ability to dodge fireballs, and a general tenacity, which is quite impressive. And then, after she had defeated the natural forces, came a storm of enchanted, powerful dragons, beasts, fairies, all of these creatures that she fought because, as we well know, she is skilled at killing animals with her bare hands and larger ones with her sword. And then, after that, out came the sorcerer himself. Quickly, she stuffed the eye amulets into her mouth, and then the sorcerer pulled out the gold brooch, the golden light shining across the battlefield and paralyzing any mortal creature who still lived after Bradamant was done with them. Bradamant pretended to be paralyzed, frozen in shock. She was dead. And as the sorcerer approached, a magical rope coiling from his hands with which to bind her and kidnap her as well, she held her position and then struck, attacking the sorcerer. and using his own magical rope to bind him. At last, her work done, she sauntered off of the field and towards the door once more, ready to go in and free Rogero so they could go on lots more adventures. "Wait," said the sorcerer. "Wait, help me. You have destroyed my magical forces. You have destroyed the forces of nature and the dragons and the fairies, and now you're going to destroy what I've worked so hard to create. At this point, my life is not worth living." The sorcerer was prone to drama. Bradamant turned back. I'm not going to kill you. All of the bloodshed is, just for the show. I don't go for killing cold-blooded type of thing. That's not really my style. "Wait," said the sorcerer. "You are destroying the plan, the beautiful plan. All of everything within those walls is going to be crashing down. All of what?" said Bradamant. "You just kidnapped people. That's pretty horrible. I'm going to free them now and let them all live their lives out in the world, as you do, lots of adventures." "No," said the sorcerer. "No, don't free them. I've locked them into my castle, and day and night, they live the best possible life. Nothing you could give them would ever be any better. They are happier locked in my castle than anyone alive." "What?" said Bradamant. "You kidnapped them out of some kind of love, kindness, happiness?" "Yes," said the sorcerer. "I see all of the pain in your mortal world. I see all of the horrors and the bloodshed, and I wanted to kidnap some people and lock them in my castle and feed them as much food, as much drink, as much fun and games, as much experience. I wanted to give them happiness locked inside my castle." Adamant was still confused. "You mean to tell me that by locking people in your castle with as much material things as they could ever want, you're thinking you would create some type of small microcosm of world peace?" "Yeah," the sorcerer. That's exactly what I. The sorcerer explained to Bradamant that he had captured all of these people and locked them into his palace for their own good, into a small world, one in which nothing would ever go wrong, one in which everyone would have whatever they wanted and could never want for anything else. Bradamant explained to the sorcerer that that's a very pointless life. Life is one in which you have the freedom to go out, make mistakes, see tragedy, see evil, see horror, not get what you want all the time. Bradamant explained to the sorcerer that sometimes the best part of the quest isn't the heroic part, but the part where you're just riding exhausted through the woods on a horse, eating tiny birds. And it's not very heroic, but that's what life is, said the sorcerer. And with that, because Bradamant had better things to do with her time, she rushed into the castle, freeing everyone who had been locked inside, leading them off to live their own lives, some of whom were happy about the change, some of whom weren't. Rogero, for his sake, was very happy. He got to ride off into the sunset, lots of quests and adventures, new beginnings, new endings, everything he could ever adventure and enjoy with Bradamant. And as for the sorcerer, well, I like to think that he got to set himself free from a little bit of his magic, just as Bradamant had set everyone in that fated, horrifying castle free. I like to think that the sorcerer let loose, lived a little, experienced some mistakes, and then, hopefully, came up with even more stories for us to entertain and teach many, many hundreds of years later. Thank you.
Our next storyteller is Madonna Hanna. Madonna is an actor, a world-class athlete, a public speaker of some renown. In 2015, she was a semi-finalist in the prestigious Toastmasters World Championship of Public Speaking. Tonight, however, she is a storyteller. Ladies and gentlemen, here's my friend, Madonna Hanna.
Good evening. My name is Madonna Beauclair Hanna. In 1986, I attended the Beauclair family barbecue reunion. Toastmasters and everyone else who is listening this evening, I met my cousin Zola, first of all, to meet an African-American woman named Zola was exciting to me, seeing how my name was Madonna, which is also an interesting name for an African-American female. My cousin Zola was born in 1898, just as the sun was setting on the 19th century. She lived throughout the 20th century, and as the sun was rising on the 21st century, she passed away. I met her when she was 88 years old. There she was at the barbecue, looking like a queen holding court as our relatives danced and sang and joked. She was waiting for her barbecue plate. I observed her to have a regal appearance. Her hair was braided so that it looked like a crown. She had golden, smooth, caramel-colored skin, and her dark eyes had a mischievous twinkle, and she had a very sassy smile. She wore a sleeveless white house dress and white slippers. My Aunt Alverna said, "Madonna, take your cousin Zola this plate." Oh my gosh, on the plate was a serving of collard greens with fat back that it had been cooked in, candied yams with toasted marshmallows melting on it, a square of cornbread dripping with warm, hot honey, and a piece of chicken that had been blessed with my Aunt Alverna's special secret barbecue. I happily delivered that plate of food to my cousin Zola. I sat on the ground by her feet, tried not to stare at her while she was eating. That would be rude. But I was so anxious to ask her about her life because my Aunt Alverna had said, "Ask your cousin about her life." When Zola finished eating, I said, "Cousin Zola, Aunt Alverna said to ask you about your life." And my cousin smiled and she said, "Well, baby, I'll do that." Zola Beauclair Smith James Kennedy shared her story with me. She was born in Tupelo, Mississippi, to Eugene and Callie Beauclair. Her mother, Callie, wasn't the nicest person. You see, at the age of 7, my cousin was expected to clean the house, cook 3 meals a day, feed the chickens, churn the butter, and pick cotton. She was an industrious child, but her work wasn't quite good enough for her mother, who would often beat her with a stick made of tightly wrapped tobacco leaves. She beat Zola a lot, to the point where Zola would let her father know, her father, a hardworking man who was up at the crack of dawn working and wouldn't come in until it was lunchtime or the sun was setting in the evening. And he was a man that wanted peace, so he sided with his wife. That didn't sit well with Zola. At the age of 7, she decided to run away from home. So one night, she didn't pack any clothes. She packed a square of cornbread and pork rind and wrapped it up in an old dish towel, and she left. She is 7 years old in the deep South, running away from home. Her trip took her to many places. She did odd jobs along the way because, after all, we know that she knew how to work. And a child that would work, to help their keep was something that people would readily hire. When Zola was 12 years old, she married her first husband, Joseph Smith. He was 25 years old, and he was a heavy-set, jolly kind of a guy. But it turned out that he was a very mean, cruel drunk. He drank all the time. And when he drank, he beat and abused Zola. Well, enough of that. She wasn't putting up with that. So she left. And I said to her, "You didn't get a divorce?" And she said, "Baby, Black folks didn't know nothing about a divorce." So off she set to seek yet another new beginning. When she was 18 years old, she found herself in New Orleans, which was even exciting back during that time. And she met her true love, her second husband. His name was Jesse James, not the outlaw, but a gambler. She said that he was a purty man, not a pretty man, but a purty man. Her eyes sparkled when she talked about him. He had black curly hair, light brown devilish eyes, and he dressed real fancy. That's what she said, real fancy. And they sang and danced all the time. One night, Jesse didn't come home. Jesse had been gambling in an alley, playing dice, and he was shot to death. My cousin had lost a man that she truly loved and who had truly made her happy. It was many, many decades before Zola Beauclair Smith James married again. Her third husband, Mr. Michael Kennedy, she met in East St. Louis when they were working in a pocketbook factory. Zola sold linings inside of purses that she would never, ever be able to afford. And Mr. Kennedy was a custodian. Zola shared with me that she didn't love Mr. Kennedy. He was a companion to her. She said that he was a tired old man who would never beat her because he was too old and tired to beat her. And I thought, oh gosh, life was pretty rough. Yeah. And so another new beginning for Zola. I said, did you ever have any children? And she said, no, baby, but I found one. You found a baby? Oh, yes, baby. Apparently, one day when my aunt was walking home from the pocketbook factory, there was a baby in the very middle of the street, traffic whizzing by, and she was crying. The only thing this baby had on was a very wet, nasty diaper. My cousin stopped traffic, walked across the street, and picked up that baby, crying in that wet, soggy diaper. And my cousin took it upon herself to find out where that baby lived. She figured she had to live somewhere in this neighborhood because she's out in the middle of the street. For nearly an hour, my aunt knocked on every door until she found where the baby lived. The door was opened by, we'll just say, a very tired-looking woman wearing a house dress, which was accessorized with 5 clinging little fish that were attached to her dress and her apron. She looked at my cousin and said, I don't want that no account baby girl. And since you made it your business to bring her here, you can have her. And she slammed the door in my cousin's face. My cousin was so happy to have that little baby girl. This child that was screaming and crying and was wearing this nasty wet diaper. My cousin instantly named her Linda. And I said, what did your husband say when you came home with this baby? And she said, honey, that man didn't say anything. He's too tired to say anything or do anything. And I said, okay, did you legally adopt that baby? And you know what she said? Honey, black folks didn't know nothing about adopting babies. My cousin and I from that day stayed in contact. We wrote back and forth for 16 years. I love my cousin Zola. My gosh, she was such a hero to me. She persevered and just to me lived a courageous, extraordinary life from the age of 7. and she passed away at the age of 104. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been my honor and privilege to share the life of Zola, Beauclair, Smith, James, Kennedy. Thank you.
Thank you, Madonna. Our next storyteller is Joy Ross. In 1993, Joy enrolled in a storytelling class at Pierce College, and she never looked back. The journey, she says, has included telling at many festivals in the United States and a trip to China with the storytelling troupe Ethnotech, which she invited me to go see at one of the libraries here a couple years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, here is Joy Ross.
Thanks, Brad. Yes, let's just take a little sideways over to China, because it was a riveting experience at the storytelling village in the middle of a cornfield where we went. Not because of my storytelling, oh heck no, with a double translation and a big gap in experiences of spirituality and various things, my story felt pretty flat. But another lady in California and I had collaborated before we made our trip. I took a string mop, Dawn detergent, and corn syrup. She took a roll of armature wire. And there we made hoops that were wrapped with one string of that mop and offered bubbles, soap bubbles, to this small village. They'd never seen them before. Now, the village only had primary kids and grandparents, because anybody that was of working age was in Beijing making money before the Olympics. We were a success doing that, and it was a wonderful connection. Okay, let's meet the people in our story that we're going to visit tonight. You have Mary Ellen and you have William. They had gone to high school together, and in fact, grown up in this very small town alongside a much larger city. William, not Bill, William is 2 years older than Mary Ellen. So you know how it is in high school. You don't collaborate much between the grades. You stay in your own groove. But Mary Ellen was aware of William, and he was polite, and that was very cool. Now, Mary Ellen was very successful in school. She was a good student. She joined a birding group. She did camera work. William was well liked. He served on the student council, graduated and went on to college. Mary Ellen didn't think a lot about him, but she would see him because the college was so close that he could drive back home for Sunday dinner with his parents, see his friends from high school. And if he ran into Mary Ellen, he was polite, and it was nice. But the sky sort of took a dive for Mary Ellen when in his second year of college, William brought home Priscilla. He invited her to come to his parents' house for Sunday lunch. Priscilla was a whole nother level of existence. She was a debutante of an upper class, and William was smitten. Back to college they went, and the whole little town was abuzz with William and Priscilla, William and Priscilla. Mary Ellen was beginning to realize in her senior year that she kind of thought a lot about William, but had to push it aside. William and Priscilla made the front page of the paper in his second year of college when he escorted Priscilla to a debutante gala experience. That was kind of hard to get over for Mary Ellen, but nonetheless. Somehow that summer, when William came back at the end of his second year, Priscilla didn't visit as often, some, but not as often. And he visited Mary Ellen quite a bit. They became friends and buddies, conversed, talked, walked, went to movies, and so on. And he went back for his third year of college, and they stayed very, very connected. And in his senior year of college, he proposed that they get married. It kind of warmed Mary Ellen's heart to even this day when she thought about the buzz that she got the guy. Priscilla wasn't in the picture anymore. They were very happily married newlyweds in our story now. And they live in an apartment inside the big city, so it's closer for William to commute to work. Now, she does a lovely, lovely job of taking care of the apartment, takes lots of walks around the big city, visits the parks. She volunteers at the local library. And she even takes a class or two as she works to complete her own degree. Life is good. It really is. Until one evening, William comes in, calls out to Mary Ellen, who's in the kitchen cooking dinner, and says, "Oh, Priscilla stopped by today at my job." It's a good thing Mary Ellen's back was to William. He did not see that shock in her face, her intake of breath, and maybe just a tear began. She pulled herself together, turned around to bring the supper to their table, and said, "Oh?" He said, "Yeah, she had lunch with me." Uh-huh. She's sending a wedding gift for us. Ah. Dinner was kind of a quiet affair that evening. They watched a movie afterwards and started the next day. Well, Mary Ellen had some thinking to do. Why this disruption in her very spirit, her very soul? You know how some things just niggle at you as you get on the years. You think you've outgrown some of this, but well, you haven't. She went through her day, and William came home that night and he says, "Oh, did Priscilla's gift come yet?" And she said, no. Oh, okay. So they had their dinner, went on, everything was fine. The next day, that postman delivered the box, pretty good sized box. And in a beautiful, engraved, expensive return address label, she knew it was from Priscilla. She took that box, she hid it in the coat closet in the hallway, back in the deep, dark recesses, and shut the door on it. She isn't sure why she did it that way. And William came home that night and he said, usual things about how his day went, and did Priscilla's gift arrive? And she said no. She wasn't sure. Now, why did she lie about it? So the very next day, she got that box out, popped it on the kitchen table, and opened it. She took out the top wrapping and looked inside. It was a vase in 100 pieces. Oh, what was William going to say about this? Well, William wasn't going to have to say anything. She put out newspapers, she put all those pieces out, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. Can you imagine doing a 3D jigsaw puzzle as she tries to put that vase back together? As it got close to the time when she should be fixing dinner, her head hurt, her eyes were strained, her neck was a mess. She scooped it all up, put it in the box, and hid it back in the coat closet. William came, they had dinner. He didn't even mention that gift that night. But the next day, she whipped through those chores, got that box out, and worked and worked and worked. And eventually she had a nice, we're going to call it a vase now, because this is an expensive piece of work. It's a picture of Napoleon looking across at some burning city. Okay. But there she sets it up on the table. There's the box over the edge, and she cleans up her work mess, freshens herself up, and meets William with a smile, saying, Priscilla's gift arrived today. He says, oh, he gave her a hug and a kiss. He went over and looked at it and picked it up. Says, that looks like something Prissy would send, doesn't it? It's ugly. How about if we just put it back in the box, hide it away on some shelf? We'll get it out if she ever comes to visit at all. How does that sound to you, dear? Mary Ellen felt within her a releasing like wings lifting above, as hope and understanding. Love? Yeah, probably. That's exactly what they did with it. They began to fix it up. And so William picked it up, and they had the wrapping paper stuffing there, and he went to put it. He said, it's at least 1.5 inches or 2 inches too big. Female. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. Holy mackerel, I turned orange. Oh, well. Our next storyteller is Linda Spadoni. Linda was raised in a family of storytellers. She says, my grandfather could take any incident and turn it into a story. Of course, we never knew just how much of it was true. That said, I learned from the best. Ladies and gentlemen, here is Linda Spadoni. Linda, I think you're muted. There you go.
Okay, I can talk now, but there's something across me that says, this lost the spotlight, your video for everyone. Would you like to?
Ignore it. It was on mine too, hon. Forget it.
Okay, but first I have to start with a preface because that was not correct, what Brad was just saying in my introduction. When I had written my introduction, it evidently was too long, and so he edited it and he put the wrong grandfather in there. When I was a little girl, I lived until I was 8 years old. I lived in a big old house with my Italian grandfather, Nonno, his 2 younger sons, Rudy and Claudia, and my mom and dad. And those were the ones that told all the fancy stories. So I'm just going to move over where that thing isn't. Anyway, they could take anything and make it into a story, and they did. And what they called it was embroidering the facts. And there was one day that Uncle Rudy was crouched down on the floor in the living room, and I was about 3, and he was trying to tell me something and make me believe it. And I kept shaking my head, no, 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 no. And he would say, well, okay, I'll change. He would change the story a little bit and say, now do you believe it? And I would say, no, no believe. And he would keep going into for quite a long time. And he didn't know that in the kitchen, my mother was standing behind him. And so he finally said, why don't you believe me? And I said, Mommy, wiggle her face, no. And that's how that saying got started. So after that, when somebody would have in our family would not quite believe it, we would say, Mommy, wiggle her face, no. And that meant you're telling a lie. However, they called it embroidering the facts, and now I'm old enough to embroider. So I'm going to embroider one about my other grandfather, who had his own way of starting stories, which was very irritating. However, grandparents lived right next door to our house so that we could just run over there whenever we wanted to. And one day, or when mom was going to be late home from school, she would just give us a call and say, go over to your grandparents after school. So we would go over there, and grandpa would come in from the garden, and he'd sit down in his big green chair, and we'd say, tell us a story, grandpa. Tell us Home Hector. And he would say, oh, you want a story, do you? Okay, I've got one for you. I'll tell you a story of Jack and Nori, and now my story's begun. I'll tell you another about his brother, and now my story is done. And we would say, no, Grandpa, not that one. We went up, that's not even a real story and it's too short. And he would say, okay, well, I'll tell you a longer one then. It was a dark and stormy night in Patagonia. 3 men sat around a campfire. One of the men said, tell us the story, Mike. And this is the story he told. It was a dark and stormy night in Patagonia. 3 men sat around a campfire. And one of them said, tell us the story, Mike. And this is the story he told. Well, of course, it kept going on like that all the time. So we'd say, no, Grandpa, not that one. We want Home Hector. And he'd say, well, not that one. Okay, I'll tell you the one about the rich farmer then. There was a rich farmer, and he had a really good crop that year, and he made a huge barn. And the next year, when he harvested his wheat, he filled the whole barn with that wheat. But what he didn't know was there was a little crack on the side of the barn. And a grain of wheat would fall out that little crack. And an ant came along and picked up the grain of wheat and took it back to the anthill. And it told all the other little ants about him. And all the ants got in a line and they came over, and a piece of wheat, a grain of wheat would fall out, and an ant would pick it up and carry it back to the anthill. And another grain of wheat fell out, and another ant would come along and carry it back to the anthill. And another grain of wheat fell out, and another ant came along and carried it back to the anthill. And another grain of wheat fell out and picked it up and carried it back to the anthill. And we would finally say, not that one, Grandpa. That one never ends. Tell us Home Hector. And he said, you want Home Hector? We'd say, yes. And he'd say, well, why didn't you say so in the first place? And then he would tell Home Hector. Now that is how it always started. And my mom said that's how it always started when they were little kids too. So my brother and I talked it over, and we decided that we were going to hear the end of the story. So one day we went over to Grandpa's house, and he had just come in from the garden and had his lunch, and he was sitting down in his big green chair, and he had his newspaper in front of him. And Roger and I came in, and I carried in a drawing book, some coloring books and a drawing pad, and Roger brought in his cars, and Paul, who was only 3, came in with some stuffed animals and stuff. And we sat down on the living room floor and we said, tell us a story, Grandpa. Well, he started out the same way with the Jack and Nori story, and then the dark and stormy night story, and then he finally got to the farmer story. And we just sat there and let him go on, ant after ant after ant after ant. And I just colored and drew, and Roger played with his cars, and Paul played with the stuffed animals, and he went on and on and on. And finally, Grandma came in from the kitchen, and he said, oh, Jean, do you have something for me to do? And she said, no, I heard you start this story with our 2 girls so many times, and I always had chores to do, and I never heard the end of it. So today I'm just going to sit here and do some mending and listen for the end of the story. And she sat down on the couch. So Grandpa had to go on, ant after ant after ant after ant. And pretty soon Mom came in after school, and he said, oh, Margaret, do you need me for something? And she said, no, Dad, you started that story for Vera and me so many times when we were kids, and we never had the patience to listen to the end of it. So I'm just going to sit here and check my school papers and listen for the end of it. So Grandpa had to go on, ant after ant after ant after ant. And when my dad came home from work, Mom jumped up and met him at the door with a big kiss and whispered in his ear what was going on. So he came in and sat down too and said, well, John, I've heard you start that story with the kids, and I've never heard the end of it. So I'm just going to sit here and listen for the end. So Grandpa had to go on and on, ant after ant after ant after ant. And probably when he was on his 3,000th ant, I don't know, we weren't counting. We were just messing around, playing with our things. He finally decided if he was ever going to get dinner, he would have to end the story. So he spoke an end of it. So he told the end of the story. And several days later, Roger, Paul, and I went over there to Grandpa's house again. And Paul climbed up on Grandpa's lap in the big green chair and said, "Grandpa, will you tell us the story about the ants again?" Grandpa looked at it, all three of us, and they chuckled, and he said, "How about Home Hector?" And we said, "Yes, that would be great." Well, for Grandpa, that was the beginning of a new era of storytelling. He never told the ant story again. Now I have, when I've been school teaching, I've done that sometimes to the kids, and it's just funny because they say, "That's all about the ants. Don't tell the ant one. Tell us this one or whatever one of the other ones was." But anyway, for Grandpa, that was a new beginning, and he had been doing that same beginning with the Jackanory since my mother and her sister were little children. So it was a big change for him. Now that story, my mom used to tell us things when we ask a question about trees or something about nature that she wasn't sure what the answer was. She would just sort of make something up. And then she would tell us it was a little known fact of nature. Well, what you have just heard is a little known fact of family history. Part of that was true and part of it wasn't. Could you tell where the break was? I'm not going to tell you.
I'm not going to even try to guess, Linda. Thank you, Linda.
You're welcome.
Our next storyteller is Kathleen Benoun. Kathleen has been a member of Fireside Storytellers League for 30 years. That's almost as long as I've been around. Her adventures in storytelling include telling stories at street fairs, festivals, schools, and once she says she even told at a dentist convention. Ladies and gentlemen, here is Kathleen Benoun.
Hello, all. Spring a la carte was published by O. Henry back in 1906, making it 115 years old. And although this story is not as famous as Gift of the Magi, I think it's just the right story for this time of year. Because it was a day in March, and somewhere in big New York City, there was a young woman who was hunched over a typewriter in a freezing room, crying her eyes out, crying like a spring shower. And why? Because it was spring. Now, let me tell you about springtime. You can't always believe the almanac. Spring comes when it comes, but for all of us, we can tell spring is coming if we listen or we look, because we see that peak of the first crocus coming out of the ground. The dogwood and the cherry trees begin to blossom. And of course, you can hear bird song in the morning. Sarah had arrived in New York City a year before. She came with her typewriter in tow, looking for a job in the Big Apple. She found a housing in a woman's boarding place, a nice red brick in a nice neighborhood. And when she walked out into the street, she saw right next to the boarding house, Schulenberg's Home Restaurant. How convenient was that? So she came in, she tried to order from the menu, but she discovered that the proprietor of the restaurant wrote out by hand the daily menu. And that hand wasn't very steady. In fact, she noticed in the time that she was there that sometimes customers ordered things they didn't intend to simply because they couldn't read the fellow's handwriting. And so Sarah struck a deal with Mr. Schulenberg. She had a typewriter and she would agree to type 21 cards with the daily menu in exchange for 3 meals per diem. And the deal was struck. And that is why on that particular March morning, she was clacking clack on her typewriter and crying. She was crying because it was spring. You see, that time, 1 year ago, she had spent 2 weeks at Sunnybrook Farm. And it was there that she met the wonderful, the dearest Walter. Walter was the son of the farmer of Sunnybrook Farm. They spent a magical 2 weeks together. They eventually talked about a life together. She mentioned that she was obliged to go on with her plans to go to New York City to find herself a job. And Walter agreed that in a year he would join her in New York City. You know, they wrote to each other. Every week she'd get out that typewriter and she would write a letter to her dearest Walter. And every week he'd answer until about 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, when a year before, he had fashioned a crown of dandelions. He had put it upon her head and declared her his queen, and that in 1 year he was coming to marry her. But it was spring now, and she hadn't heard from him for 2 weeks, and so she was crying. And as she looked at the cards, the handwritten notes from Mr. Schulenberg, and as she was beginning to put the cards inside, she noticed that the cards had a beautiful little picture of dandelion blooms. And of course, that was the cause of her own spring showers. Dandelions, a crown of dandelions. Walter, dandelions, Walter. And you know, about that springtime and the fact that she could see that the grass was growing, she could hear that the birds were singing. You know, the other girls in her boarding room area, they were all talking about going out to shop for Easter dresses and Easter bonnets. And the reason that her room was so cold, by the way, is because the janitor, the team, turned off the steam. Well, she put on and that reminds me. That was yet another sign that it was spring as she looked at the handwritten notes of Mr. Schulenberg, because the heavy cream soups of just a few weeks ago had been replaced. It was now broth. Pork was now replaced with lamb. And the reason for the beautiful dandelion illustration is because Mr. Schulenberg was offering salad. He was offering young dandelion leaves with a hard-boiled egg served with French dressing. Dandelions, Walter, dearest Walter, whom she hadn't heard from for 2 weeks. So with tears, she continued to type each card, 21 cards in all exactly the same. Dandelion leaves with a hard-boiled egg with French dressing. And when she was all finished with the 21 cards, she went next door and she delivered them to Mr. Schulenberg. And very soon thereafter, she got one of her per diem meals. And wouldn't you know it, it was dandelion leaves with a hard-boiled egg with a garnish of French dressing. She ate her meal in her cold, cold room. It was a dull day. Did I mention that? Just not a day to go out for a nice stroll. So she decided to sit by the window and read a book. And she was reading and looking out at the grass growing, and she heard a commotion downstairs, and she heard the voice of her landlady. And then she heard a male voice. And the next minute she jumped up, she dropped the book, she ran out of her room, she went flying down the stairs and into the warm embrace of Walter. And they hugged and they kissed. And they departed, and she said, Walter, where have you been? Well, Walter tipped his hat and said, well, honey, I was traveling here, and I gotta tell you, baby, New York is a big town. I had trouble finding you. And Sarah smiled. He said, well, honey, how did you find me? And he said, well, darling, I would know your typewriter anywhere. Haven't you been writing to me every week? And from his pocket, he pulled out a menu card. And it was one of the menu cards that she had typed that very morning. Walter looked at it and he showed it to her. And you see this, honey? Nobody, not a typewriter in the world, types a capital W like your typewriter. So I asked the restaurant owner who had typed up those cards, and he told me where to find you. He handed her the card, and she studied it real carefully, and you know what she read right there in her own typewriting? Dearest Walter, with hard-boiled egg. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is O. Henry's Springtime a la carte.
Great. A happy ending.
Our final story for this evening, told by me, is a Japanese folk tale entitled The Crane Wife, which is arguably the most famous Japanese folk tale of all time. And like so many of the stories that Japanese parents tell their children, it centers around the great white cranes, which, as you may know, are large, beautiful snow white birds that stand about 4 feet tall, the wingspan of 5 to 6 feet, and long, graceful curved necks like those of swans. They're found all over Japan, Southeast Russia, China, and in tropical regions all over the world. But it's in Japan that the cranes are especially revered and are often depicted in their stories and folk tales as possessing magical powers bordering on the miraculous, as they do in my telling of this beloved folk tale as well, The Crane Wife. Once, long ago in Japan, there lived a poor woodcutter named Ichiro, who after a long day of cutting wood in the forest was walking home along the side of a rice paddy when he spotted a great white crane that appeared to be in some distress. When he got close enough to the bird, he saw what the problem was. One of its legs was caught in a hunter's trap, and it was struggling frantically to free itself. "Shusha, my friendo, quieta," Ichiro said, "and I will help you." So he bent down and opened up the trap, freeing the frightened bird, which took a few wobbly steps, then spread its long white wings, and before you could say sayonara, was high up in the air, off to rejoin its flock, leaving Ichiro feeling relieved, yet wondering if the bird even knew that he just saved its life. But his reverie was short-lived, as just then the hunter, who was out making his rounds, checking on his traps, saw Ichiro free the bird and angrily confronted him. "You must pay me for the loss of my property," the hunter demanded, "or I shall report you to the prefect." "But do I have no money to pay you?" Ichiro pleaded. "I am a poor woodsman. I barely make enough cutting wood to feed myself. If I must pay you, I will be forced to go hungry." "Ha!" snarled the hunter. "You should have thought about that before you vandalized my trap." Angry at his insinuation and a bit scared, Ichiro pushed past the hunter and continued on his way home. That night, While Ichiro was cooking his evening meal, a gentle knock came at his door. When he opened it, there, standing in the chill night air, was a beautiful young woman dressed in a thin cotton kimono. Now, this was something that didn't happen to Ichiro all that often, a beautiful woman standing at his door. In fact, it had never happened. So dumbfounded, he just stood there for maybe 15 or 20 seconds like a statue. When finally the young woman asked, "May I come in? It's very cold out here." "Oh, hi. Yes," stammered Ichiro, finally finding his tongue. I am sorry, but you are so beautiful. I mean, I'm not sorry you are beautiful. Please, come in and warm yourself by the fire." So the young woman entered Ichiro's home and stood by the fire, revived by its warmth. "I am afraid I got separated from my flock today, Zoo," she said. "I mean, my friends. Then I saw the light from your window. You see, I am not from this place and knew of nowhere else I could go. So I wonder if I may impose upon your kindness and stay here until the morning. I have a bag of rice. I would be happy to share." So Ichiro poured her bag of rice into the pot along with his own. Then they both ate. And soon after, exhausted from her trying day, the young woman fell fast asleep. Ichiro stayed up by the fire a while longer, looking at her beautiful face, wondering about the future. In the morning, Ichiro awoke early. He was concerned and mystified by the previous day's and night's events. Would the hunter report him to the prefect, as he said? Would the prefect put him in jail? Would the young woman be here when he returned? Would he return? Time will tell, Ichiro thought. So he pulled on his boots, buttoned up his coat, and with one last hopeful look at the young woman asleep on the floor of his house, he set off for work. He followed the same path along the edge of the rice paddy as the previous day. No sense of trying to avoid the inevitable, he thought. But the path was clear. No hunter, no prefect. He walked unmolested to the forest worksite, where he cut his quota of wood for the day. But on the way home, he wasn't so lucky, as he was greeted by both the hunter and the prefect at the very spot he'd freed the great crane. "There he is," pointed out the hunter. "He's the one who vandalized my trap." "Is that so?" asked the prefect. "But I gave you no thought to who possessed what," Ichiro pleaded. "Only that the great crane was in distress, and I could not bear to see it suffer." The prefect, who was known for his uncompromising treatment of vandals and thieves, scratched his chin. His gruff features and stern gaze, uncompromising as well, seemed to soften a bit upon hearing Ichiro's plea. "I do see," he said. "Nevertheless, your actions have deprived the hunter of his profit. So, under these circumstances, you have 30 days to make the hunter whole." Relieved not to be put in jail, Ichiro bowed to the prefect and continued down the path to home. When he got there and opened his door, the afternoon's events still swirling in his head, he'd all but forgotten about the young woman, whether she'd still be there or not. But before he could step inside, he hesitated. His house, he noticed, was unusually clean. And he wondered for a moment if perhaps he'd walked up to the wrong one. Then he saw the young woman bending over the fire, preparing his evening meal. How beautiful she is, he thought. That evening, Ichiro told her about all that had happened, about freeing the crane and about the hunter and the prefect and having to make the hunter whole, worrying where he was going to come up with the money to do so without himself starving. When the young woman said, I can help you. While I was cleaning today, I noticed you have a loom in the back room, which was covered in dust. It was my mother's, Ichiro explained. When we were children, she would weave beautiful cloth on it and sell it in the marketplace to earn extra money, which keep us all well fed. I do kind of weave, the young woman said. If you allow me, I can do also weave a cloth on your mother's loom. And with the extra money, you can pay your debt. Very well, Ichiro replied. So between them, they came up with enough coins that Ichiro was able to buy some thread. And then the young woman set about weaving. And in a few days, she'd woven a beautiful bolt of cloth. But after selling it in the marketplace, they calculated that even if she would weave day and night for the entire month, it still wouldn't be enough to extinguish his debt, and he'd be put in jail. Their hopes dashed, or so it seemed. The young woman then told Ichiro something astonishing. She possessed some magic, she said, that she could only use in the direst of circumstances, and only if the strictest of conditions were adhered to. She would weave a bolt of cloth, she told Ichiro, that would be the finest ever seen in Japan, which would put an end to their poverty. But the conditions were, she admonished him, that she must shut herself up in the weaving room until the cloth was finished, and that he, Ichiro, must not open the door to look inside for any reason whatsoever until the cloth was finished. He agreed. So she shut the door to the weaving room and once more set about her task. For one whole day and one whole night, she worked relentlessly at the loom, never once stopping, never once asking for food or water. Only the click, click, click of the treadles and the knock of the shuttlecock as each thread was woven. Until at sunrise on the next day, this unrelenting sound of the loom ceased, and the young woman emerged from the weaving room, visibly thinner, her hands raw and shaking, holding a bolt of the most delicate, shimmering white cloth Ichiro had ever laid eyes upon. Angel cloth, he said. An angel cloth it was. And when Ichiro took it to the marketplace and sold it, he returned home with 10 gold coins. Many times the amount of debt he owed, and more than enough for them to live comfortably for several years, if she would agree to be his wife. And she did. It wasn't long, however, before news of this beautiful angel cloth began to spread. And one day, a messenger for the governor of the prefecture knocked on Ichiro's door. The governor, the messenger said, request that if you will weave a bolt of a cloth for him, like the one you sold in the marketplace, he will gradually pay you 100 gold coins. 100 gold coins, Ichiro turned to his wife. With that much money, poverty will never touch us again. But the husband, his new wife pleaded, the magic is powerful. It to control me as much as I control it. And if the circumstance aren't to die, you are right, Ichiro interjected. How could I have been so thoughtless? Of course, we must deny the governor's request and hope he isn't so angry. But as it turns out, it wasn't the governor's request so much as it was the governor's wife's demand that she should possess such rare and beautiful cloth. So Ichiro's wife relented. She loved him. And she told him that for his sake, she would weave one more bolt of angel cloth, but it must be her last, or else the magic would surely consume her. And once again, she warned him that he must not open the door for any reason until she herself came out. So she shut the door and once more set about her task. For 3 whole days and 3 whole nights, she worked relentlessly at the loom, not once stopping, not once asking for food or drink. Ichiro, for his part, anxiously paced the floor, up and back and up and back, each time passing the door to the weaving room. One moment thinking about all of that gold and the security it would bring them. And the next, shame for not having refused the governor's demand. For he remembered how much the angel cloth took out of his wife the first time, how thin and frail she appeared when she emerged from the weaving room. He was also distraught by her admonition that if the circumstance wasn't truly dire, the magic would turn on her. She has been in there nearly 3 days, he thought to himself. 2 more than before. What does this mean? Could the magic be consuming her? My wife, he called at the door. My wife, are you okay? But she didn't answer as the loom continued unabated. Click, kada, click, kada, click. Click, kada, click, kada, click. Click, kada, click, until Ichiro could stand it no longer. Kada, click, and ignoring his nice admonition, kada, click, he pushed open the door, kada, click, kada, and froze, aghast at the sight in front of him, which was not his beautiful crane wife, but that of a great white crane, beak stained with blood from pulling out its own feathers and weaving them on the loom into the angel cloth. I am the crane that you released from the hunter's trap that day, she said. I became a human in order to thank you for your kindness. Then I stay because I fall in love with you. But now that you have seen me in my true form, the magic has left me, as I must leave you, my husband, and to return to the world of cranes. And with that, she took flight, leaving behind the nearly completed bolt of angel cloth as her parting gift. Now, there's an epilogue to this story. It's said that after a period of mourning, Ichiro took the cloth to the governor of the prefecture and his wife, and upon presenting it to them, told them the story, this story of his beautiful crane wife and how the angel cloth came to be, which so moved them that they declared the entire prefecture a safe haven for the cranes, as it remains to this day. And that concludes our program for this evening. We ran over a little bit, but I hope you enjoyed it. And I would like to thank all of our storytellers, all of the people that helped make this happen, and especially you, our audience. I hope that you've been entertained.